Life Reflection, Chapter 4, Romance and Relationships. So today's reflection is going to be on mostly our relationships, I guess like romantic relationships, when I was younger up until I'd say college. That is going to already be a lot because I guess I started dating, I guess you can call it that, or being in sort of like fake relationships when I was a teenager. So just stuff like that. And it was related. There are some relations to the divorce and just perhaps side effects of the way I grew up. A lot of the relationships weren't great relationships, even if they were still young and more or less not real relationships. But let's go ahead and start off with the first one. I guess my first fake, not real girlfriend was from 7th grade when I was in middle school. There was a girl who was in my classes, and I guess I was like an honor student is what they would call it. I didn't really think much of it when I was a kid, but I think she sort of did. She had a little bit of pride in it, and I think that's totally fine. I think I sort of had some pride in it as well, since I was a pretty overall prideful person when I was younger. I still am somewhat of a prideful person, but in a very different way. I think back then I was definitely very, very arrogant in some ways. But 7th grade was a very, very interesting transition. It's like 7th grade is the start of middle school, and before that is elementary school. And we haven't really gone into school life. We'll probably do that later. But for now, my first fake girlfriend, like I said, was someone who took interest in me after we met in classes and stuff. It was probably after the first month or two, and then she would talk to me a lot and ask me to do things a lot, like hold her books and all that stuff, and she would call me hubby. And at the time I was young and dumb, and I thought hubby for some odd reason meant like a camel. Like I somehow related the word hump, which is like a camel's hump. Maybe I watched too much Rush Hour, because there was like a scene where the Chinese guy was giving Chris Tucker that like food that was called camel's hump or something. And for some odd reason, I just thought hump was related to camels, and that hubby sounded like hump for some reason. So I thought I was her camel that held her books and stuff like that for the longest time. Like, I think the entire time I was with her, I always thought that hubby meant camel or some sort of thing related to camel. I think it's one of the stupidest things ever, but that's something a kid can easily mistaken when they're young. So that happened, and until like a lot later, I think it might have been in high school or something, I realized that was like an association that I made incorrectly. But either way, for a long time, I did whatever she asked me to do. There was actually a moment where one of my close friends, we're still close friends now, was very cold. It was like during a winter day or something, and she asked for my jacket, or I lent her my jacket. And at a certain point, my girlfriend was like, "Oh yeah, I'm cold, blah blah blah. Can I borrow your jacket?" And I just like took the jacket away from my friend and gave it to her instead. And she was quite sad by it and remembers it to this day with clarity. And unfortunately for me, I don't really remember that moment very, very well, but I thought it was funny that my friend recalled it, or can recall it well. Either way, it was mostly just me sort of playing along with whatever she felt like doing, whatever she felt like saying. And her friends were very encouraging, saying like, "Oh yeah, you should say this, you should do this." And I sort of was like that guy who just like go along with it, and whatever people encouraged me to do, I would just do, I suppose. So it must have been winter time, because I don't remember being with her for too long. And the moment that we broke up was around February or Valentine's Day, because that's when I got like a Valentine's Day gram, is what they call it, like just a message or some sort of like card from someone else, anonymous. And there were a lot of people who were telling me, "Oh, it's from this person, it's from this person," or "Who is it from? Why is it anonymous? Because you have a girlfriend, and like it should be obvious like that it's from her or whatever. But and I was stupid. I didn't get my girlfriend one. I didn't really even get her a gift. Someone else gave me a gift to give her actually for Valentine's Day. And this is sort of like how fake the relationship was. Like after I gave her that gift, it was the first hug that we had. The first hug. I don't even think we held hands. But I remember how funny it was because like there was her friend, like I always interacted with her a lot and I thought it was fun and whatnot. But it seemed my first girlfriend was like, oh yeah, I think she might have some feelings for you, blah, blah, blah. We should like sit her down and talk with her and, clarify things. And I was like, okay, sure. We never did it. Thank goodness, because that would have been very awkward. But there was just a lot of random moments somewhat like that. It was a lot of very kiddie school crush romance stuff that had really no significance whatsoever. But again, with the Valentine's story, after I got that from an anonymous person, I eventually asked the person who gave it to me, was it you? And they told me it wasn't them, but like literally everyone was telling me it was them. So eventually, I would keep asking and she would eventually tell me that it was her. And for me, I think I had more interest in the other girl. So what I ended up doing, especially because one of her friends was like constantly pushing me to be like, yeah, I feel like you should break up with the girlfriend you have right now and like, take some time and get closer with the other girl who gave you the Valentine's card, who was, they were best friends at the time. So like, of course her best friends are going to try to convince me to like do that. But like I said, I was that guy who's kind of just got pushed along and did whatever people were telling me to do. But I did feel like I truly had more interest in the second girl. And that's pretty much what I did. I broke up with the first one. And after about, I think it was 2 weeks or so, I asked out the second one. And the way I asked her out was like terrible. Basically, I asked her, hey, like my friend or our mutual friend, her really good friend, told me to say this. And then I basically said the line afterwards. And it was just asking her out essentially. And she said yes. And part of me was happy about it. I was running back home. Part of me felt like happy with energy. And I remember one of my friends saying that she saw me running back home and thought I looked like silly and stupid. So that was that was a sign that I was clearly happy about it. But yeah, I was very awkward though. Like just repeating the lines and saying that my friend literally told me to say these things was really bad. I definitely got told by my friend, like, why did you say that? Why did you do it that way? I thought it was funny. Yeah, I was a very, very awkward kid, very dumb, I'd say. With the second girl, I had a better time. We held hands. We would occasionally like kiss each other on the cheek, but that's pretty much as far as it went. This was still in 7th grade and we were very young, and oftentimes we would just talk a lot and walk around together a lot whenever we were on field trips. I remember one of the field trips, like hiking and whatnot, and we would just like hike together while holding hands and stuff. Occasionally, I remember that hike, like we would like separate sometimes, and I feel like someone was telling me that, oh, she wants you to catch up with her and all that stuff. There was a lot of like subtle messaging going on, like stuff that I noticed that people do now still, which is surprising because I consider it to be like pointless. Like, why not just communicate your feelings clearly? Like, it's much easier to do that than it is to have secret hidden feelings hidden behind like certain actions and wanting the other person to guess at what it means. I get that it could be fun sometimes, or like it's like a test to show if whether or not the person actually is interested in you and stuff like that. I can see that, but at the same time, to me it's easier to just communicate those things. That's my romantic style, I guess. But anyways, eventually, I acted dumb a lot. I don't know why I did that, but whenever she would ask me questions like, oh, do you prefer a fast relationship or a slow relationship? She didn't actually ask me that. She was like, implying it through other means. I knew what she meant, but I decided to just play dumb and like act like I had no idea what she was saying. And I think because of that, and also just like a lot of things that I did stupidly, like she ended up breaking up with me. It lasted for what, maybe like a month or two, and that's it. So after that, I was actually pretty sad about it. I cried about it, and I wanted to like talk to her about it. I ended up perhaps doing one of the stupidest things, which is to approach her right after she broke up with me, like the day after in school. And in that morning, I went to her and I was like, hey, can we talk, please? And what happened was she ended up saying no. And for me, I was not right in the head, I would say. I'd say at the time, this was 7th grade. This was right before the divorce was happening. And right while the divorce was happening, because basically the divorce happened this year. My mom decided to move partially, I think, because of the divorce, and there was like a lot of stuff happening at home, I'd say, at the time. And so I stupidly sort of like, when she rejected the talk, I was like, hey, please, like, so I grabbed her arm near her hand and was like, please, like, I was just like pulling her a little bit, and then she would resist quite strongly. And what happened was, eventually I would let go, but it was sort of like a little bit of a tug of war type of thing that lasted for under 10 seconds. It wasn't too long, but it was definitely something that I should not have done. It was just like a reaction. I didn't really think about it very much. And I was just like, thinking about my dad at the same time, like someone is about to leave, and then like someone I care about as well is now leaving at the same time. And it was kind of like a double whammy, I suppose. So that's what happened, and it wasn't a great moment for sure. I definitely regretted that, and I said sorry to her again afterwards, and she eventually forgave me. It took some time, but I think during that year it wasn't forgiven. I think it was eventually like later on, and we were friends afterwards. Like we were friends in high school and we were friends in college. Like we saw each other occasionally and hung out and caught up and stuff. Not so much anymore, but glad that, we ended up still being friends. That was important, I feel. But after we broke up and stuff, I got, I don't know what happened. This was like a stupid thing that I did. I was not a great kid, honestly. I was not a great kid. So what happened was me and my friend were just talking, and I don't know how I ended up being on the subject of like my first girlfriend, but he was like, oh, like I dare you to ask her out again or whatever. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I ended up asking her out again, and then she said yes, which was crazy to me. And we ended up just being in a fake relationship again for about a month. But this time, we held hands and stuff. But that's it. Just like hold hands and hug. That's it. And our communication was terrible. Like it wasn't a real relationship at all. And eventually I just like broke up with her again. And after, it was like a label. That's basically what it was. The second girl, like that was more of like a kiddie romance type of thing where there were some feelings involved. And then after that, after the breakup, one day later, again, I was a really terrible person, a terrible kid with like zero sense of morality. One day after I broke up with the first girlfriend again, I asked out a different girl who clearly like was interested in me because, we would talk a lot and we would sit next to each other really close a lot. And it happened to be the second girl's like really, really close friend, like a different one, not the one who convinced me to ask her out the first time. They were like really close friends. And I think what ended up happening after that is they weren't as close anymore, of course. But it didn't last too long. This was near the end of school, and, she knew I was moving. People knew I was moving. And so it was sort of just, spend as much time together. And I'd say my third girlfriend was, I did care about her, and I'd say we were closer for sure, like than the first one. First one was like fully fake. Second one was, like I said, a kiddie romance. The third one was also a kiddie romance, but also with like a dark twist, because this third girl, her family life might have been as bad or worse than mine. Like I heard her, like we would call each other on the phone when weren't in school a lot, and this was like my home phone because I didn't have a cell phone yet, and it must have been her home phone too sometimes, because she didn't have a cell phone either. But whenever we called, I would hear her crying a lot, and like people yelling in the background, and just a lot of turmoil and anguish, and just so much negativity and crying. But to me, it felt normal somehow. Like it felt like wow, I understand her because I go through something similar when I was a kid. But thinking about it from this perspective, my God, like that was so bad. I'm glad I could be there for her, and that I was at least on the phone with her and stuff. But the way she had to live was, as a kid, when she was a kid, it was just dang. But we ended up breaking up, and for some odd reason, I mean, I don't know what the reason is fully. I mean, I can guess because I wasn't the best person, but she, after we broke up, she basically didn't like me. Like she didn't want to have anything to do with me, which is totally fair. I mean, the context in which we got together was also not great. So there was some emotion behind that one. Even if it wasn't fully like a real relationship, it was still something I remember pretty well, just because of how much negativity she had to bear. And I really hope she's doing a lot better. I haven't talked to her since then, but yeah, I really, really hope that she's doing a lot better. But yeah, after that, we moved, and like I said, I was pretty depressed for a while, but some friends ended up pulling me out of it. And eventually there was another girl who was actually like someone I met through a friend I knew back then, through my first school, my elementary school. And it was interesting because, I still kept in touch with those friends as best as I could. The move was a big part of what defined one of my biggest characteristics, which is like, I guess it's sort of like abandonment issues. Like first my dad abandoning me, then moving and feeling like I'm being abandoned by some of my friends, because, it's very difficult for friends to keep up with you if they're not in the same school, especially when you're that young. And especially when you don't have cell phones. This was back when we would use like AIM and stuff like that, but it wasn't like as simple, I suppose, as just having a phone and just texting each other and whatnot. So AIM on the computer was the best we had. And so I did lose a lot of friends, and I was very sad about it for a while. I'll talk more about this in a later episode, probably the next one. Abandonment is going to be, a big one. But to move on with the relationship stuff, I ended up meeting the new girl at like my sister's birthday party, I believe. And interestingly, this was, again, very terrible on my side. I figured out that she liked me, but it was based on like the party, but I didn't remember who she was. I just knew that, I knew her name and who she was in relation to my friend because of the fact that my friend told me. And I didn't really know that she existed at that party. I didn't pay much attention to her. Either that or I like completely forgot. But I played it as if I did, and I continued to be like, oh yeah, like love to talk to her again and all that stuff. We ended up talking on the phone occasionally, and this was around the time I think I finally got my first cell phone. It was around 8th grade. So we might have talked using cell phones, and we would call each other, just talk to each other about stuff and get closer that way. And I feel like this was another sort of fake-ish relationship. It wasn't me really liking the girl that much because I didn't remember her, and I honestly didn't really remember how she looked that much either. Again, this is AIM times. We didn't really have. didn't have Facebook yet. So I didn't know how she looked, but I was just like going with it. I'm going to say this over and over again. I was not the best person when it came to morality in terms of that stuff. And so after we talked a bunch, she eventually came to my birthday party for 8th grade. And I remember that birthday party well because one of my friends that was one of those friends that pulled me out of that depression, she was like, hey, you know, like, I've been noticing that you and that girl are like really, really close and stuff. We were like holding hands and all that stuff. And it was very interesting, like, you know, like meeting someone that you've been talking to, but you didn't like fully know how they look like. And then holding hands and all that stuff. It's that was as far as we went. We didn't do anything else, just holding hands. But very interesting experience, I'd say. I would occasionally meet up with her again whenever I got the chance to go back to closer to LA City, which is the original place where I lived. And yeah, it felt nice to be with someone. I think having my dad leave like that and the move and all that stuff, it was just nice to feel a connection with someone, even if it was not fully like developed, even if it wasn't like a real relationship. It was just nice to have someone that says that, you know, they care about you, who can tell you that they love you and all that stuff. It was just comforting. But over time, this was interesting. I don't know what happened, but we just didn't talk as much at a certain point. It was the summer before high school started, and we didn't talk for about like a month or two, which was so weird. I don't know why that happened, but at the time, in the beginning of high school, I ended up like, there was this other girl who would look at me a lot, I guess, and I would look at her a lot, and we became friends, and we would just, I guess, eventually we got into a relationship. I asked her out and stuff, and while we were in that relationship, the girl that I was dating in 8th grade, like, asked me like, hey, are we still in a relationship? And I thought that was such a weird moment. It was such a weird moment. I was like, whoa, like we haven't talked in like 1 to 2 months. I just assumed that we were like done or something like that. But again, these are like kiddie romances. So like there's no telling what can happen in those because there's no real sense of communication, connection, and all that stuff. It's just like, yeah, it's strange. And after that, I just told her like, oh, I thought we broke up. And after that, we didn't really talk. Interestingly, I saw her again recently. I think it was like last year or last year, but I didn't recognize her, but she said hi to me. And I was like, she was saying hi to me in a very friendly way. And she's married now. And I'm like, I was very surprised, but I'm very happy for her. And when I realized who she was, I was like, oh my gosh, like I am so sorry for everything that I did when I was like in 8th grade, like so many years ago. And I was just apologizing profusely because of how dumb I was. But she obviously said, was like, it's totally fine. It's like we were kids. But yeah, it's just interesting history regarding kiddie romances, I guess. But after that, in 9th grade, for the relationship that I had, the new one, it didn't last long. It was just about a month, less than a month. And the reason was because I ended up hanging out with a different, my old friends from elementary school and middle school. And we hung out at a mall. And there was also like a different friend that tagged along. And this was, I don't know what happened or how this ended up happening, but I had communication with this person beforehand. And we talked to each other a fair amount. And so when we met up, we hung out with our friends, and it ended up being like, okay, we were the last two to be picked up. Me, because I guess I was being picked up by my uncle who still lived around the area. So it was going to be late. And then she was also being picked up late. So we ended up being just us two. And we were just hanging out and talking, sitting next to each other. And she was asking me questions about romance, and she ended up asking me, she asked me stuff about, guess who I like and all that stuff. And I was guessing who she liked, and I was playing dumb, I guess. And she ended up saying that she liked me, and she held my hand, and I was technically in a relationship, and I kind of just let it continue. Despite that, again, very, very not moral kid. I will own up to that. I definitely think I was an idiot, but that did happen. And after that happened, I was like, okay, I feel like I can't be with my high school girlfriend because that happened. So I ended up breaking up with her. So I had some conscience at the very least. And I ended up being sort of convinced, not necessarily convinced, but more so just like, because that happened with the new girl at the mall, the one I had mutual friends with, like we ended up being in sort of a relationship. And that one was an interesting one for sure. We just talked a lot on the phone, and I'm not sure. Yeah, we would occasionally meet because, again, this was like, at the time, in a kiddie relationship, what I would call like a bit long distance, just because it took maybe about an hour or so just to get there by driving, and I couldn't drive, so I had to like depend on other people to take me to that area. So that was the relationship, and it lasted for maybe like a month or two. And afterwards, we ended up breaking up because she kept on talking about things related to diseases, cancers. I think she was like worried that she had something. Luckily, I don't think she actually did. But at the time, it kind of scared me because I was a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what this is all about. And she's all asking me like, are you willing to wait for me, and stuff. And as a kid, I was just like, this seems way too scary for me. So I just like ended up bailing. And what ended up happening was a terrible turn of events. I ended up getting back with the first high school girlfriend, who ended up being my first real relationship. And it didn't become real until later. But when we were back together, like, we treated each other pretty poorly. I think she purposely, I know she purposely treated me poorly, because she eventually told me when she tried to break up with me, like after about 2 months or so, that she only got back with me to hurt me because of how I hurt her in the beginning. And yeah, that's how toxic it was. That's how incredibly toxic it was. And amazingly, after she told me that, I begged her to stay with me. This was all through text also, not even in person. I begged her to stay with me because I felt like I needed someone to sort of be attached to stay connected to, because that's sort of how I was ever since 7th grade started, ever since like the divorce was happening, and ever since the move as well. Like, I just felt like I needed someone to attach myself to. And it was terrible, but I guess when you beg someone and all that stuff at that age, like, they kind of give in. So she gave in, and we stayed together despite all of that. And somehow we turned it into a real relationship. It wasn't the best, but I ended up really, really caring about her and loving her, and always saying how like I would marry her and stuff. It was definitely that teenage romance type of relationship. A lot of my friends were like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And it didn't happen. Like, after all, they were correct. But at the time, I really, truly believed that we would end up like being together forever and stuff. We would say that all the time. And she was my first real relationship for sure. And yeah, I still care about her very much. And we were friends after we broke up in college. We got back together and broke up with each other too many times to count. So again, it was a very rocky relationship, but it was the first real one that I had. And yeah, unfortunately, we no longer talk, but I think I fully understand like why that is the case. It's at the time when it happened, like after around college or so, like I fully understand now that back then we weren't good for each other when we were with each other. Even if we were friends, like sometimes it would slip into like habits where we felt we were a little too close for it to just be a friendship. And I think that wasn't healthy, especially since, we were trying to move on from each other. So when she called it off and said like, we can no longer talk and no longer meet, I was very, very sad. But at the same time, like, It ended on good terms, and we said we'll always care about each other and love each other. And ironically, interestingly, like we somehow ended up in the same Discord group during COVID. So I actually got to hear from her. We hardly talked directly to each other. It was just during voice chat whenever we were in the same group of friends and just talking. And this was like somehow connected with like my elementary school friend who had nothing to do with her. And she was in that group instead of like my high school friends or whatever. So yeah, it was very, very interesting to hear her voice again and everything like that. But yeah, never any like one-on-one conversations, but I did manage to at least ask like how she's doing, and she says that she's doing well. So and she seemed like she was doing well. So I'm very happy for her. And she's in another like a relationship right now, I believe. I don't keep up with her. I don't like stalk or do any of those things. So, but the last time I did talk to her around that time, like that's what she was up to. And I was very glad about it. But yeah, she was a very, very important part of my high school life, I would say. But again, I'll get into that in a different episode. I feel like right now we have abandonment, which is a big, big one. And then high school on the list, or school in general. But high school was a pretty big one, so it might be divided somewhat. All right, but for now, that's going to be it for this one. This was basically my story, my reflection on like the relationships I had, the romantic relationships I had when I was younger. And again, a lot of them were very much like kiddie stuff, like it could barely be called a relationship. I wouldn't call it a relationship until the high school one. So, but again, it also was like a reflection of my mental state as a kid, as a teenager. It was like I sort of just went along with things. Like you don't really have that much will when you're at that age regarding romantic relationship stuff. At least I didn't. It was sort of like whatever happened, like just happened. Except with the second one in middle school, where I actually tried to convince her to stay and stuff, and also in high school when I actually convinced her to stay. So that was obviously like me trying to play some role in it, but that's more so just me like trying to keep an attachment rather than me like caring for the relationship itself. And that's sort of the role that the divorce played in these relationships, and why I just decided to talk about this after that, because like for sure at those moments, like all of these things happening, it played a major role in me really wanting to be attached to someone. And for me, I like if I could meet up with each of these girls again, I would like apologize, like tell them that I definitely regretted what I did. And, hopefully they would understand that I was a kid. And if I could explain to them like my state of mind at the time and also my life status at the time related to the divorce, I'm sure they would understand. But I don't want to make excuses for being a shitty kid or someone that didn't have good morals when it came to relationships. But again, like I didn't have that father figure to teach me how to do things properly. In fact, I had a model, a father figure who basically did things poorly and terribly. And I sort of did the same thing when I was a kid, which again is just terrible. And I regret those actions 100%. Luckily, I believe I pretty much didn't do any like real harm to any of them. Like maybe at the time, it was like hurtful, the things that I did, but any like real permanent damage, no, none. Any traumatic experiences, I'm pretty sure none as well. And for the most part, like the high school girlfriend, like after I begged her to stay and we were together for a while, like it became a real relationship, and it became something where like she loved me as much as I loved her, maybe more, maybe sometimes it was less. It kind of like went back and forth. Like sometimes I broke up with her, sometimes she broke up with me, sometimes the other person would like try to get back with the other person. It was really chaotic, but basically what I'm trying to say, like it wasn't like a one-sided relationship where I was just trying to get her to stay with me and all that stuff. It was definitely, it ended up being like a real relationship, and something that I grew a lot from. I'm debating in my head whether or not I should make like a dedicated episode to her because I feel like there were a lot of things to unpack in that relationship, but I'm not sure yet. If I do, it'll be like one of the later ones. We'll see. I just feel like there's a lot that I need to remember first because it's a lot. But that's it for this one. We'll catch you guys in the next one.